Montana Territory, 1881. The first time Barrett Jameson laid eyes on her, she was holding a pistol in one hand and dragging two crying children behind her with the other, her dress torn at the hem and blood on her sleeve, but none of it hers. He pulled his horse to a stop outside the burned-out homestead just east of Red Lodge, booted feet still in the stirrups. Smoke still curled from the charred remains of the barn. The sky was angry with storm clouds, and so was she. "Madam," he said carefully, eyes flicking to the children, both under 10, scared stiff, clinging to her skirts. "You in trouble?" The woman turned to him slow, her voice low and steady. Handled it." She looked like she had too. Her dark hair was tangled, her face smudged with soot and grit, but her eyes, sharp and blue, were clearer than anything he had seen in weeks. Barrett dismounted and stepped forward, careful not to spook the kids. "You got a name?" "Camille," she said, without offering a last name. "You got a plan, Camille?" She glanced over her shoulder at the smoldering barn. "Not anymore." The boy beside her, skinny and freckled, wiped his nose on his sleeve. The little girl clutched a ragged doll and stared at Barrett like he might vanish if she blinked. "They yours?" Camille hesitated. "No, their mother died 3 days ago. Their pa turned on us yesterday. He set the barn on fire after he tore up the house. I shot him before he could hurt them." Barrett's jaw tightened. "You alone out here?" "Not anymore, apparently." He let out a breath, nodding. "Name's Barrett Jameson. I run cattle west of here, across the Stillwater. You need a place, I can offer one, just until you figure things out." She didn't answer right away. Her hand was still on the pistol. "You trust easy, Barrett Jameson." "No, ma'am, but I trust what I see." "You could have run, you didn't." Camille looked down at the children. "They got no one else." "Then let's raise some trouble together." Her mouth twitched, something close to a smile, but she nodded. They rode out within the hour. Camille rode behind Barrett on his gelding, the children bundled up in a blanket in front of her. The wind picked up as they crossed the foothills, the land stretching wide and open under the fading light. Barrett's ranch was modest: one main house, a bunkhouse, a small barn, and enough land to keep 30 head of cattle fed and fenced. He had built it with his own hands after the war, hauling timber and stone through 3 winters and 5 floods. Camille said little as they settled in. She took to the children with a quiet steadiness, washing them, feeding them, tucking them into the spare bedroom without fuss. Barrett watched from the kitchen doorway, arms folded. "You got away with them," he said as she lit the oil lamp. "I was a teacher before all this." He nodded. "They sleep yet?" "Out cold." She turned to face him. In the soft light, the soot and blood were gone. She looked tired but calm, her hands resting loosely at her sides. "Thank you," she said. Barrett shook his head. "You did the hard part." Camille looked at him a long moment, then walked past him into the kitchen. "You got coffee?" "Always." They drank it in silence at the table, the wind rattling the shutters. By the week's end, the children Aliyah and Emmy were running through the grass like they had never known fear. Camille mended clothes and helped with the cooking, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back with a strip of muslin. Barrett found himself looking for her without meaning to, by the well, in the barn, on the porch with a book in her lap. She was sharp with her words, calm with her hands, and quick with a laugh when the children did something foolish. One afternoon, he caught her teaching Aliyah how to saddle a horse. The boy was too small for the job, but she guided his hands with patience. "You ever plan on settling somewhere?" Barrett asked from the fence. She looked up, brushing hair from her face. "I thought I had." He nodded. "You always this quiet?" she asked. "Only when I got something worth listening to." Camille smiled then, and this time it reached her eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, she joined him on the porch. The stars were sharp in the sky, the moon low and full. "You ever raise any trouble before?" she asked, her voice soft. "I did once. Got me a scar on my shoulder and a limp in the rain." She laughed gently. "This kind of trouble's different." "Yeah, it is." He turned to her, "but maybe the kind worth keeping." Camille looked away, blinking toward the dark horizon. "I do not know how to be someone's trouble anymore." Barrett reached out, his hand brushing hers on the porch rail. "Then we figure it out together." She did not pull away. Neither of them said another word, but she stayed beside him until the sun began to rise. The first frost came quiet, dusting the grass in silver before dawn. Camille stepped out onto the porch with a basin of water and let the chill bite at her arms before she rinsed the soap from her hands. Inside, Emmy was still curled against the quilt, and Elia had taken to rising with Barrett, trailing him through the morning chores like a shadow. Barrett was already out by the corral, pulling down last season's tack to oil it before the snow came heavy. Camille joined him without a word, crouching beside the fence rail to wrap a new strip of leather around a fraying rein. "You know horses?" he asked without looking away from his work. "Well enough not to get thrown," she said, drawing the leather tight. "My uncle bred quarter stock in Kansas. I helped him summers when I wasn't in the schoolhouse." Barrett grunted, approving. "You ever break one?" "Twice. Both times I ended up limping and cussing." "Uncle said I had a soft seat but a foolish streak." He chuckled low in his throat. "Sounds like he knew you well." Camille didn't answer right away. Her fingers moved steady over the rein. Then she said, "He died in the spring of '78. Fever took half the county. After that, I started moving west." Barrett nodded, still rubbing oil into the worn leather. "What were you hoping to find out here?" "I guess I thought the land might give back something the towns had taken." He set the bridle down and leaned back against the fence, eyes on the mountains rising beyond the grasslands. "And did it?" Camille looked up at him. "Not yet. But I'm still here." That afternoon, Barrett brought down the old ladder from the loft and set it against the side of the house. The roof had taken a beating in the last storm, and the shingles above the porch were curling like bark. Camille hauled the bucket of nails and climbed up without being asked. Barrett steadied the ladder, watching her feet as she moved. "You ever done roof work?" "Only when I had to." "Well, today you have to." She smiled without showing her teeth, then took the hammer and got to work. He climbed up after her, and they spent the next hour in silence, side by side, boots planted firm on cedar planks. At one point, she paused, shading her eyes with her wrist. "You ever think about selling off and going someplace softer?" "Once. Then I remembered I'm built for hard things." "You are that," she said quietly, and went back to hammering. That evening, Camille found the children sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, sorting dry beans by color. She knelt down beside them and started helping. "Barrett says we can keep the hens if we feed 'em right," Elia said, looking up. "He say that, did he?" "He said you're smart enough to make the hens outlive the winter." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Did he now?" Later, when the children were tucked in, she found Barrett in the barn closing the gate on the last stall. The oil lamp threw long shadows across the packed dirt. "You said I was smart with chickens," she said from the doorway. "I did. You say things like that often, only when I mean 'em." She stepped into the barn, boots quiet on the straw. "Why are you being good to us?" she asked, voice low. "I don't see it as goodness," he said, latching the gate. "I see it as right." Camille leaned against the post, folding her arms. "You don't know what I've done, what I've had to do. I saw enough at that ruined homestead to know what kind of woman walks away from it with 2 children still breathing. That's all I need." She looked at him a long time, her face unreadable in the dim light. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she said finally. "You're living," he said, "and you're welcome to keep doing it here as long as you want." She nodded once, slow. When she turned to leave, she paused at the barn door. "Don't make promises you'll want to take back." "I won't," he said. She didn't look back, but she didn't walk fast either. And Barrett stood in the quiet after she was gone, feeling something in his chest settle like dust after a storm. The wind shifted west that morning, dry and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and mule deer from the higher ridges. Camille stood near the smokehouse, arms crossed, watching a hawk circle above the cottonwoods. Emmy tugged at her apron, whispering about a nest she'd found near the creek, and Camille crouched to listen, brushing a leaf from the girl's hair. Barrett came up behind them with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. His shirt was damp from the morning's work, and dust clung to his boots. "You ever help with branding?" he asked, glancing toward the lower pasture. Camille straightened. "No, but I can learn." He nodded once. "Elia's with Henry in the east field. Think he's hoping to earn his keep." She nodded, brushing her palms on her skirt. "He asked me last night if he could sleep in the bunkhouse when he turns 12. Barrett adjusted the rope. "You tell him yes." I told him we'd cross that bridge when we got there. The cattle were restless in the pen, thick with the smell of sweat and dust. Camille tied her hair back with a strip of linen and followed Barrett through the gate. She watched carefully as he worked, noting the grip of his hand on the calf's flank, the quick press of the iron, the way he murmured low to settle the younger stock. When it was her turn, she took the iron without flinching, held it steady despite the heat. Barrett watched, silent but close, ready if she faltered. She didn't. That evening they sat beneath the cottonwood near the back fence. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, bleeding orange across the fields. Camille leaned against the trunk, boots off, feet tucked beneath her. Barrett sat beside her, arms resting on his knees, eyes on the far slope. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened?" she asked, voice quiet. He didn't answer right away. "Then, I'd probably be somewhere else, still trying too hard to outrun something." She nodded. "I used to think I'd be teaching in a red schoolhouse with white trim. Married to a man who read the paper every morning and wore a clean collar to church." Barrett looked over at her. "You still want that?" Camille picked at a blade of grass. "No. I want something steadier than appearances." He let the silence stretch until the wind moved through the branches overhead. "You've settled in," he said. Camille looked up. "Have I? You notice things. The way you fixed that fence line yesterday without being asked. The way you keep the children steady without smothering em." She gave a small smile, tired but true. "I didn't realize you noticed. I notice everything around here, especially what's worth keeping." The words hung between them, not heavy but solid. Camille looked away first, toward the barn, where the lantern inside had been lit and flickered against the boards. "You think we'll make it through winter?" she asked. "We'll make it," he said, "but we'll have to lean hard into each other." Camille turned toward him. "You sure you want to lean on trouble?" He reached over, covered her hand with his. "I already am." She didn't pull away. After a moment, she laced her fingers with his and leaned her head softly against his shoulder. The dusk deepened around them, but neither moved. Inside the house, Emmy's laughter carried faint through the open window, and the scent of wood smoke drifted on the wind. Barrett shifted, just enough to rest his cheek against Camille's hair. "You're not what I expected," he said. She closed her eyes. "Neither are you." They stayed like that until the stars came out, quiet and close, the night folding gently around them. Barrett found her in the garden just past daybreak, kneeling in the brittle soil with her sleeves pushed to the elbows, scraping away the last of the withered kale. The light hadn't risen fully yet, but her breath clouded in front of her and dew clung to the hem of her skirt. The frost had taken most of the late harvest during the night. He leaned on the split rail fence, arms folded, watching her work without speaking. She didn't look up when she spoke. The rest's gone. What we salvaged yesterday will have to stretch. Barrett nodded once. I'll ride out to Absaroki. The feed store might still have sacks of beans or barley left. Maybe pick up some flour if they've got any that hasn't weeviled. Camille stood slowly, brushing dirt from her palms. If you're going that far, I'll come. Emmy's got a cough starting. I want to see if the mercantile's got dried horehound. Barrett's brow furrowed. You sure? The children will be fine with Henry. He's already taught Elia how to mend a fence post and burn his own breakfast. I trust him. Barrett gave a short nod. Saddle your mare, then. It's a long ride. They left just after sunup, the air sharp with cold and the sky brittle blue above the trees. Camille rode with her back straight, her coat too thin for the wind but her hands steady on the reins. Barrett kept the pace even, mindful of the mare's slower gait. The land stretched wide and brown around them, the trees stripped bare, the creeks running low. They didn't speak much on the trail, and that suited them both. It wasn't until they passed the half-frozen bend in the still water that Camille broke the silence. You ever think about leaving Montana? Barrett didn't turn his head. Used to when the winters bit too deep, thought about heading south, maybe Arizona territory, but the sky's too small there. She glanced sideways at him. You measure your place by sky and silence. Some places got too much of one, not enough of the other. Camille looked ahead again, her voice quieter. I don't mind silence. Never did. Absaroki was quiet when they arrived near noon. The sound of the forge echoed down the main road and a dog barked somewhere behind the livery stable. A few wagons were hitched outside the feed store, and smoke curled from the chimney of the mercantile. Barrett tied the horses out front and helped Camille down. Inside, the old wood floor creaked under their boots. The shopkeeper gave them a nod but didn't ask questions. Camille moved straight to the shelves, her eyes scanning glass jars and cloth-wrapped parcels. Barrett picked up a sack of oats and slung it over his shoulder. You find what you need, some dried horehound. A bit of willow bark, too. Not much left. I'll make sure we've got enough salt and lamp oil before winter sets in hard. As they walked back toward the horses, Camille paused in front of a small table near the door. A stack of hand-bound ledgers sat beside a crate of spools. She picked one up and thumbed through it. I used to keep a book like this in Kansas, she said without looking up. Every name and grade, every note I passed to a child's mother, every ink blot that ruined a page. Barrett stood beside her. You could keep one again. She closed the book gently, setting it down. Maybe I will. They loaded the supplies and left the town behind with the afternoon sun low on the horizon. The wind had picked up, colder now, and the path home felt longer with the weight they carried. Halfway back, they came across a broken-down wagon tilted in the ditch off the main road. A man, thin and red-eyed, stood beside it, his boots caked in mud and his hands shaking as he tried to lift the wheel. Barrett reined in. You need help? The man looked up, wary. Axle snapped. Been here since morning. Barrett dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby branch. I've got tools in the saddlebag. Let's see what we can do. Camille stayed on her mare, watching the tree line, her hand resting near the rifle slung across the saddle horn. The man's wife sat in the wagon bed, holding a bundled child close to her chest. After an hour's work and some muttered curses, the axle was braced well enough to hold. Barrett stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. That'll carry you as far as the next post stop. After that, you'll need a smith. The man nodded, voice thick. I'm obliged to you. Barrett didn't answer, just climbed back into the saddle. As they rode on, Camille said nothing for a long stretch. Then, you didn't have to stop, I know. They could have been dangerous. They weren't. She looked at him, her profile lit by the last of the sun. You trust your gut. only when it's earned it. They reached the ranch just before dark. Emmy was asleep in the rocker by the hearth, and Elia was on the floor beside her, a half-whittled stick in his hand. Henry nodded from the kitchen and slipped out without a word. Later, Camille stood by the fire, unpinning her hair with slow fingers. Barrett watched her from where he sat, boots off, the ache of the day sinking into his bones. "You ever think about teaching again?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "Sometimes. You'd be good at it. I could build a room off the barn, something warm, a place for books." She turned then, stepping closer. "You offering me a schoolhouse, I'm offering you a place to build what you want." She stopped in front of him, her hands at her sides. "And what if what I want ain't so simple? Then we make it simple." She stared at him, the firelight catching in her eyes. "I don't know how to be someone's future, Barrett." He reached up, took her hand, pressed it to his chest. "You already are." This time she didn't look away. The snow came early that year, thick and wet, falling in slow, hushed layers that blanketed the barn roof and softened the world until sound itself seemed to settle. Camille stood at the window with a mug in her hands, watching the flakes drift past the glass. Behind her, the fire hissed low and steady, the room warm with the scent of pine kindling. Barrett ducked through the door with a canvas sack slung over his shoulder, shaking snow from his hat and shoulders. He set the sack down by the hearth and held his hands out toward the heat, flexing the cold from his fingers. "Trapline caught a hare," he said, glancing over. "Enough meat to stretch supper." Camille stepped away from the window. "I'll stew it with the barley. There's still half an onion left from last week." He nodded, then looked at her more carefully. "You've been quiet since yesterday." She set the mug down on the table. "I got a letter." Barrett straightened. "From who?" "My sister. In Missouri. She thought I was dead." Camille's voice held no tremble, only a worn steadiness. "She heard about the fire through someone passing east." Barrett waited. "She wants me to come back. Says I have a room if I want it. Says I should bring the children and start over where people remember who I was before." "You think she means it?" "She always did." Camille stepped closer to the fire, rubbing her arms. "But I don't know if I'm that woman anymore." Barrett didn't answer straight away. He crouched to open the sack, pulling out the hair and setting it on the cutting board near the stove. As he cleaned it, the knife steady in his hand, he said, "You want to go back?" Camille watched his hands. "There's a comfort in being remembered. There's a different kind of comfort in being known." She looked up at him. "And you think you know me?" "I do. I've stood in the dark beside you. I've seen how you carry what you don't speak." Camille moved to the cupboard, drawing out the barley tin. "She mentioned a schoolhouse. Said there's a new one in town and they're looking for a teacher come spring." Barrett set the knife down. "Would you be happy there?" "I don't know what kind of woman I'd become if I went." Her voice was soft but sure. "I just know who I've become here." Barrett crossed the room and stood beside her. He didn't touch her. "You don't owe me your staying," he said, "but I'd be a fool to pretend I don't want it." Camille turned, her hands still at her sides. "I've been waiting for the weight to lift. For all of it, the fear, the running, the needing to prove I'm still standing. But it never lifts all at once." "No, it don't. But it lightens," she said. He nodded. "It does." She looked at him then, fully, as if seeing the shape of her life in the lines around his eyes. "I don't want to be remembered for the woman I was. I want to be the woman who kept going, who stood on new land and made something whole again." Barrett's voice was quiet. "You already are." Camille reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm not going." He didn't smile, but his eyes held something warmer than firelight. That night, after the children were fed and sleeping, they sat at the table with bowls of stew between them, the wind pushing against the shutters. Camille rested her chin in her hand, watching Barrett as he ate. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked, not teasing. He looked up. "I hadn't. Until you. She let the silence stretch before speaking. You'd want a small thing, wouldn't you? Just us and the children and Henry. He shrugged. He'd pitch a fit if we left him out. Camille laughed, low and warm. He would. Barrett reached across the table, taking her hand. So that's a yes, her eyes met his. That's a yes. They married 2 weeks later on a clear morning with snow still clinging to the shadows and the sky sharp with winter light. Camille wore a plain wool dress with the sleeves let down, and Barrett stood beside her with his hair combed back and his boots polished. Emmy scattered bits of pine and cedar along the path, and Elia stood solemn beside Henry, holding the ring. They said no grand words. There were no flourishes, no lace. Just truth spoken plain and a promise sealed with hands held firm. The house grew fuller after that, not with things but with rhythm. Camille opened a small room behind the barn where she began teaching Emmy and Elia their letters, then 2 neighbor children, then 3 more. Barrett built shelves from scrap wood and carved her name into the doorframe, Mrs. Camille Jameson, schoolmistress. The roof held through the rest of the winter, and by spring, the first crocus pushed up near the porch. Elia learned to trap rabbits without bruising the meat, and Emmy began sewing her own doll clothes with bits of calico. Henry brought over a fiddle he'd traded for a saddlebag, and some evenings they sat on the porch while he played and the sun dipped low. One night, as the last of the snow melted off the eaves, Barrett stood behind Camille in the doorway, his hands resting on her hips, his chin on her shoulder. "You ever regret staying?" he asked. She leaned back against him, closing her eyes. "Every day I don't is another day I know I chose right." He kissed her temple slow. "We built something here. We did," she whispered. "And it's ours now." They stood there until the fire burned down low and the stars blinked into place, the land around them quiet and wide and steady as a heart finally at peace.